This is episode 38 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Hebron, head of drama at Winchester College and author of Prospero, a Renaissance Magus for the British Library. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
We know for sure that Philip Henslowe and Edward Allen, they bought the rights to be the master of the King's Bears, Bulls, and Mastiffs in 1604. We know that they had immediate access to all of the bears, basically because they ran the King's Fighting Bears. You know, Shakespeare knew people who knew people. He had that connect, definitely.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's play, The Winter's Tale, there is a famous stage direction where the character Antigonus exits the stage, but the written directions in the play state that he is to exit pursued by a bear. In performance, this character exits as a bear, seemingly from nowhere, arrives to chase him off the stage and into Shakespeare legend. Here to help us look at the history and context of this famous stage direction is Aubrey Whitlock. Aubrey Whitlock is the Education Associate and Camp Life Coordinator with the ASC and the co-host of the podcast, The Hurly Burly Shakespeare Show. Aubrey holds a BA in Theater Arts from UC Santa Cruz, an MA in Teaching from Chapman University, and a Master's of Literature, as well as an MFA in Shakespeare and Performance from Mary Baldwin University. Aubrey, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Set us up here a little bit and explain what's happening with Antigonus in The Winter's Tale when he gets chased off stage by a bear.
Okay. Previously to this scene, which is Act 3, Scene 3, Antigonus he's an advisor to the King of Sicilia, Leontes, and he has been tasked by Leontes, who is in a jealous fit of passion, to take Leontes' newborn infant daughter to a remote place and to leave her exposed to the elements, but presumably to die. Leontes has gotten it into his head that his wife Hermione is unfaithful and that the baby is not his. And instead of casting the baby into the fire, which is what he originally wanted to do, Antigonus has agreed to do this instead, to just abandon her. So in Act 3, Scene 3, Antigonus has landed in Bohemia, which, fun fact, you actually can't do because Bohemia is landlocked. Good job, Shakespeare. But he's reluctantly carrying out Leontes' orders, and he's got a speech going on here. There's a storm happening, and while he's describing the storm and describing the baby in this monologue, at some point a bear comes in and chases him off, and Antigonus' famous last lines are, "I am gone forever." He gets chased off by a bear, and then a few lines later, we get a description from some other characters who've entered, a shepherd and his son, the clown, of what it looks like to see Antigonus being torn apart by a bear. And that's where we're at.
Well, aside from all of the moral and plotline conclusions we can make from that happening, I want to know whether or not it was common for bears to appear on stage in Renaissance plays.
Not really. They're often talked about, alluded to. There's a really great bit of trash talk between Clifford and Richard in 2 Henry VI that involves a really extended metaphor about bear baiting, but actual bears appearing on stage was rarely happened. Apart from The Winter's Tale, there's one appearance in a play called Musidorus, and then there's a pair of them in a Ben Jonson masque called The Mask of Oberon, and they are white bears pulling a chariot. And though the bear references are fearsome, bears are tragic symbols, usually beasts, violent carnivorous beasts often are tragic symbols. And they appear in all kinds of literature. They're mentioned, they appear as plot points in literature, but not so much on stage.
I believe The Winter's Tale is Shakespeare's only play to feature a pursuing bear, but was he... I guess he wasn't then. You said he's not the only Jacobean playwright to include that device, because you just mentioned Ben Jonson had used it too, but Ben Jonson didn't have a live bear on stage. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is there are very few plays in general that have bears appear rather than be talked about. And we can't prove either way that any of these plays featured actual bears. But no, Shakespeare
so even for
was not the only
Shakespeare,
one.
it could have
Right.
been a costumed person made to look like a bear.
Yes, more than likely, it probably was that. Yeah.
Well, I do know that in 1609, when The Winter's Tale was written, King James had been gifted a pair of polar bear cubs. And when you study, King James history sort of separate from Shakespeare, you learn that they had gone on a voyage to the Arctic and they brought back these polar bear cubs to give them to King James. There are some historians that want to connect those events and say that it might have been these polar bear cubs that Shakespeare put on stage for this scene, since The Winter's Tale was being staged before King James. Do you know if there's any veracity to that claim or any evidence that might suggest that was possible?
I would say that there's no evidence either way. I've been doing a lot of reading on this, not just because of the workshop that I generated that, made the blog post, but I've been referring a lot to Andrew Gurr and Tiffany Stern, who are sort of foremost in like Shakespeare staging conditions and theater going and play life during the early modern period. And they both suggest that there's no evidence really either way that an actual bear would have been brought. Now it's a different thing, when Shakespeare's playing companies would go out of their theaters, right, and perform. I know they were the King's Men. King James was their patron starting in 1603. So they would be taken to Whitehall, the palace at Whitehall, where there was a bear baiting arena and where, as you say, King James had bears. So I don't know. I don't think there's anything to really tell us one way or another, even at Whitehall, whether they brought on real bears during some of these theatrical moments.
Now, I know you just mentioned the bear baiting, which was another thing I wanted to mention, was that bears and using them in a performative way was not a rarity in England. Now, Shakespeare seems to be in a minority of playwrights putting them as pursuing characters on stage.
Right.
But bears in general were actually part of performance and entertainment culture for definitely Elizabethan England, but also into Jacobean England as well. Does the history of bear baiting have a relationship to Shakespeare's use of the bear in these stage directions? I mean, would he have had access to a bear because of the nature of theater?
Well, we don't know, right? We know for sure that Philip Henslowe and Edward Allen, or Ned Allen, who was a famous actor in Shakespeare's rival company, the Admiral's Men. Henslowe ran the Admiral's Men, and he was also Ned Allen's father-in-law. They bought the rights to be the master of the King's Bears, Bulls, and Mastiffs in 1604. So that meant that they had those two theater guys who actually ran two rival theaters, rivals to Shakespeare's theater. We know that they had immediate access to all of the bears, basically, because they ran the King's Fighting Bears. And Shakespeare knew these guys. So I think it's possible Shakespeare knew people who knew people. He had that connect, definitely. It would not have been Shakespeare to make that decision about whether or not they should bring on a live bear, because bears were expensive. They were especially trained fighting bears, or even trained dancing bears, because that was part of the spectacle in early modern life too, just a dancing bear in the streets on a chain. You'd have to pay their trainer. The bears are still, like any animal on stage, are an unpredictable scene partner. So it's a big financial, but also like theatrical risk to have a live bear.
Yeah, they don't take cues very well.
Yeah, they really don't. They really don't. Speaking as someone who has brought her own dog on stage, I can tell you, like, a dog is one thing, a wild animal, even a possibly toothless, possibly blinded bear is another. So it's risky. And it would have been Cuthbert Burbage, Richard Burbage's brother, who ran the financial side of the King's Men. That would have been his decision, I think, whether they wanted to spend that kind of money to do that and then risk their actors. So he could have done, right? Anything is possible, but for financial reasons and for safety reasons, probably not likely.
Now, I know you mentioned your workshop that you ran, and I want to tie this in because we're talking about how we don't know exactly what Shakespeare did. And then, but further than that, when you ran your workshop, y'all discovered something really interesting about the seemingly very straightforward stage direction, exit pursued by a bear. It seems like there's not a lot of creative latitude to that. But tell us about the workshop you ran around the stage direction. What did you and your students find when you gave full creative range for deciding how to handle this scene?
Yeah. So what I did, and part of my job at the American Shakespeare Center, is to develop workshops that then our touring troupe takes on the road. So there's a couple of things. I helped develop this workshop in collaboration with the touring troupe actors, and then they are the ones actually who have been leading it with students ever since. The Winter's Tale is one of the 3 shows that they are taking on tour this whole year. Judging from their rehearsal reports, this is the information that I'm getting, but I have not led this workshop myself. I just want to be clear about that. I helped them develop it, and they teach it.
And then they let it. Okay.
Right. I mean, so we all talked it through and figured out how we can make this a good pedagogical lesson to get at what I wrote about in the blog, which is that, exit pursued by a bear, there's a lot open to interpretation. Actually, there's 2 things to think about with that particular stage direction, exit pursued by a bear. The first is that the verb pursued is completely open to interpretation. What does that mean? Does the bear chase Antigonus in circles before they exit? Where is Antigonus? How does he see the bear first? When does he begin to make his exit? At what point in his speech? Because he's got a good, chunk of about 20 lines or so where he's talking about the storm and how sad he is and the baby and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden he says, "This is the chase, I'm gone forever." And then the exit pursued by a bear. So the second thing to think about is that there's no entrance cue for the bear. So we don't know exactly when the bear might come in, which is a really cool thing for students to explore just by looking at the text and pulling clues out of when they might want the bear to enter. Some editions of The Winter's Tale, some modern editions and editors will suggest for you where it might be, and they will put a stage direction in for you in brackets. But when you go back to the folio does not contain an entrance cue. Nowhere in the folio does it say "enter bear." So whatever line cued the bear's entrance in Shakespeare's own time is not recorded. And so the only thing we have to go on are the clues in Antigonus's words and what might indicate an opportune moment to enter, maybe for dramatic purposes, or, what the specific moment is when Antigonus is aware of the bear. And those 2 things are not necessarily the same thing either, So there's a lot.
There's a massive amount that you could do with it. Well, what did you learn about Shakespeare? What was the Shakespeare lesson that this approach ends up teaching you?
That there's an infinite variety of interpretations for how to stage this bear. I mean, Act 3, Scene 3 is a sort of a hinge in the play. The middle of the scene is sort of cut off by this bear. The bear appears, chases off Antigonus, chases off Cecilia and the tragedy, and then immediately 2 clowns enter, and we're in Bohemia. We're in a new world.
Yeah, it almost feels like comic relief to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we've had all the tragedy we can take. There's got to be something we laugh at, and chasing him off with a bear.
Right.
It's comedic justice almost. Like, yes, definitely you should be chased off by a bear right now.
Yeah, and it depends on how you feel about Antigonus at this point too. Like Antigonus in even accepting this job of taking this baby, to the wilderness to die is pretty shady. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And he doesn't seem to like that he's doing it, but yet he is still doing it. He's still complicit in this violence against this infant,
Do you think it distances us from Shakespeare, the lack of stage directions? I mean, this one stands out to me because Shakespeare was sparse with his stage directions on the whole, but then he includes this one that is just so weird and hilarious, and but then when you try to perform it, even when you're sticking, strictly to Shakespeare, as they say, there's still no strictly Shakespeare.
Right. Well, there are so many layers of remove between us and Shakespeare at this point anyway. I mean, the minute his handwritten manuscript foul papers left his hands, it was no longer his anymore. It got recopied. There's introduction of errors at that point, and then it's taken to the printer where there's introduction for more errors. We are so far distant, and now we've had centuries of editors, having a hand in all of these texts. So we're so distant from Shakespeare already that really all we can do is look at the stage as it might have been, which is one thing I love about the ASC, is we have a recreation of the Blackfriars Playhouse. So we play within that space as best we can, trying to approximate what Shakespeare's own company might have had, except for we have bathrooms and stuff like in-house. But other than that,
we're so glad you do.
Right. Yeah. And we look at the words and we look at the stage directions and we try stuff out, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I don't think that diminishes the work in any way, but we are distant from Shakespeare.
Yeah, I feel like part of the art that Shakespeare was producing was that it could be picked up by someone else and continued. And that's part of the beauty of what he created. One of the history aspects of this particular stage direction that wouldn't leave me was with the polar bears. The fact that I thought that story was so interesting tied back to Shakespeare being born in Warwickshire, and the heraldic sign for the Earls of Warwickshire included a large white bear that was chained and wielding a ragged staff. And the legend was that the first Earls of Warwickshire killed a bear, and then he added this ragged staff to the sign for the Earls of Warwickshire. And Shakespeare actually references this specific bear in Henry VI, which you mentioned was part of, there's another extensive bear baiting metaphor.
Right.
So I wondered if the inclusion of Exit Pursued by a Bear in The Winter's Tale might have been another reference to home for Shakespeare. Whether or not he used the actual white polar bears, it does seem interesting to me that there were white polar bears at King James's court when he was adding this into his play.
Sure. I mean, your guess is as good as mine, frankly. He could have been. We know that Shakespeare loved dropping in little Easter eggs about multiple different things, like you said, throwbacks to Warwickshire where he grew up, or little in jokes that really are kind of lost to time, that like you really have to dig now, especially as like a 21st century American audience. Definitely we would not pick up on that, but it could be, it definitely could be. The only way to know, I guess, is to get good at necromancy and wake him up.
That turns out badly for so many characters.
Does. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could try. You can try.
Well, I know we would love to learn more about this topic, especially Exit Pursued by a Bear and the history that you mentioned of picking up the little references. What are your favorite books and resources that you would recommend for us to learn more?
Yeah. So about the bear specifically, a couple of articles that helped me out were Exit Pursued by a Bear, A Problem in The Winter's Tale by Dennis Biggins. And you can find that on JSTOR. And even if you're not a student currently at a university, you can get, I think, like 6 JSTOR articles for free. So JSTOR, JSTOR. And then also on JSTOR, I found The Bear, the Statue, and Hysteria in The Winter's Tale by Andrew Gurr. And in fact, Andrew Gurr is one of the foremost scholars in this particular field in about Shakespeare's staging conditions and the King's Men as a company. So really anything you read by Andrew Gurr is going to illuminate a lot about early modern theater going life for you. Add to that anything by Tiffany Stern, who I think you've had on your show, and I'm so jealous. I want to get her on our show. She's a gem and a jewel of a human, and her brain is irreplaceable, and anything that you read by Tiffany Stern is going to, again, just rock your world. And also for a healthy bit of balance, Dr. Rosalind Knutson, her books kind of not go against what Andrew Gurr writes, but they balance out, I think, what Andrew Gurr writes, because sometimes he tends a little bit to the bardolatry, and Roz Knutson is more like, nope, let's stick to the facts. But it's around the same thing. She writes a lot about Hansel's diary and theater going life and the life of an early modern theater. And so if you're really interested in that, those 3 people, Tiffany Stern, Andrew Gurr, and Rosalind Knutson, are the places to go. Their works, reading, they really know their stuff, and reading all 3 of them together will give you a really well-rounded picture of what it was like at this time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? And my friends in England tell me I am supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
Okay. So I'm not a particularly religious person, and the complete works kind of is my Bible. So can I instead have 2 books to take with me?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great. Good, because I've already picked them.
It's your island, so yeah.
Awesome. So for me, I would obviously have my complete works. Don't ask me which edition yet, because I'm not sure I'd be able to choose. The New Oxford is pretty good, but
it's a hard choice. Yep.
It is a really tough choice. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But okay, then I would also, with that, have my complete anthology of Jane Austen's novels. and my copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein.
Oh, excellent. Officially, you are the first person to mention Shel Silverstein as their choice. So,
well, I love it. I figured if I'm going to be deserted on an island, I would want works that I could like gain comfort from sort of nostalgically, but also that I won't be bored with ever, that I could always return to. And those three things I think I could always go back to and never be bored.
Excellent choice for sure. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I also have a podcast. It's called The Hurly Burly Shakespeare Show that I co-host with my friend and colleague, Jess Hamlet. We're in our second season now. We will have covered every play in Shakespeare's canon by April of this year, so that's really cool.
Just in time for Shakespeare's birthday.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, actually. I think we record we record our canon completer like right around that time. So that's a fun thing. We're going to be attending SAA in the spring, where we hope to be a digital exhibitor. So fingers crossed. Apart from that, I am preparing for the Inside Plays lectures for the Actors Renaissance season. And if you're not familiar, the Actors Renaissance season is a really cool time to come and visit us at the ASC because there's no directors. It's like the Wild West of making theater. We recreate Shakespeare's rehearsal conditions, and the actors use cue scripts, and they only have a couple of days to put up a show. But I will be preparing the lectures on those shows, so I'm really excited about that. I also help run the summer camp that we do every year, the American Shakespeare Center Summer Theater Camp. And that is, believe it or not, it starts in June, but it really is just right around the corner. So I'm prepping for that. And I'm excited to keep, leading workshops and keep doing what I do at the ASC. I just love it.
Oh, it's a wonderful place. So we will definitely be checking out these exhibits that you mentioned. Aubrey Whitlock, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing the exciting history of exiting Pursued by a Bear.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
To hear more about the history of exiting Pursued by a Bear, as well as to see links to Aubrey's podcast, The Hurly Burly Shakespeare Show, you can find all the information about Aubrey and Antigonus at CassidyCash.com/episode 38. That's CassidyCash.com/EP38. There are just 4 spots left for our trip in September 2019. We'll be traveling through the life of William Shakespeare. We'll be visiting London and Stratford-upon-Avon. You will get to see iconic locations like the Globe, Shakespeare's birthplace, his grave, and so much more. The registration deadline for this trip is February 1st, 2019, and that's coming up just next month. So if you have not already, go and sign up and grab one of the early bird tickets that we have left there, and I'll see you in London. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope your week and your new year are a happy Shakespeare-filled new year.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.